Nobody decided to start a war. That is the part nobody tells you. The first war in human history did not begin with a plan. No leader stood up and said, "We are going to attack them." No tribe voted. No general drew a strategy on a map. It started the way most catastrophes start, with a small problem that got slightly worse every day, until one morning it was no longer small. For most of human prehistory, just war was simply not an option. Not because people were kind, not because ancient humans were somehow better than us. Because war is expensive. It costs people. It costs energy. It costs time. And for hundreds of thousands of years, the math never worked in its favor. If another group showed up near your territory, you moved. The world was enormous and mostly empty. There was always somewhere else to go. Conflict was almost always more trouble than it was worth. Ancient humans were not peaceful because they were enlightened. They were peaceful because they were busy surviving, and fighting was a terrible use of everyone's afternoon. Then something changed. Around 13,000 years ago, in parts of the world, humans stopped moving. Not because they wanted to, because they found places so rich in food, they didn't have to. The Nile Valley, parts of the Fertile Crescent, coastlines full of fish, places where you could eat well without walking 20 miles a day to find it. So people stayed. And when you stay somewhere long enough, it stops being where you are and starts becoming what you have. And what you have is something you can lose. That shift from nowhere to somewhere is the moment war became possible. Not inevitable, just possible. In 1964, archaeologists digging in Sudan made a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about early humans. A burial site. 61 people. Men, women, children. All of them died at the same time. 13,000 years ago. Before farming, before cities, before almost everything we associate with organized conflict. The site has a name, Site 117. The oldest evidence of group violence ever found. And it sits right at the edge of what was once the most fertile stretch of the Nile Valley. Which is not a coincidence. That location is the entire explanation. Researchers pop to the point with being little bit of the experience, which is only any time. Researchers building and brand Stanful point to the first bigger things and fail. Those Lawrence Keeley spent years studying the archaeological evidence for prehistoric violence. What he found was not what anyone expected. Violence between groups was not rare in prehistory. It was common. Extremely common. In some prehistoric populations, skeletal evidence of violent death runs as high as 15%. 1 in every 7 people. Which sounds shocking until you realize that the 20th century, with all its world wars and industrial-scale conflict, managed roughly 3%. Ancient humans were not peaceful. They were just fighting with rocks instead of artillery. The scale was smaller, the efficiency was lower. The percentage was higher. So what actually happened at Site 117? Researchers pieced it together from what they found. A group of people was attacked. Not a quick raid, not a single moment of anger. Something organized, planned. The attackers went through the entire group. Men who could fight back. Women. Children. The level of coordination required to do this is significant. You don't do it by accident. You don't do it in a moment of rage. You plan it. You decide in advance. That is not a fight. That is a war. The first one we have evidence for. And it happened because the people living in that valley had something the people outside it desperately needed. And there was no empty land left to walk into. Here is the thing about the First War that nobody mentions. Both sides thought they were the good guys. The group that carried out the attack at Site 117 were not monsters. They were hungry people with children who needed to eat. The people in the grave were not innocent victims in any way that matters to evolutionary logic. They were competitors. They had resources. They were in the way. The brain that decided to attack them was running the same calculation that every human brain runs in a crisis. What do we need to survive? What is stopping us from getting it? What happens if we remove that obstacle? The answer the brain arrived at 13,000 years ago is the same answer it has been arriving at ever since. The obstacle was people. And people can be removed. What made it a war rather than just a large fight was organization, coordination, the ability to get a group of individuals to act together toward a single, violent goal. This requires communication. It requires leadership. It requires the ability to convince people that the risk of dying is worth taking. Which means the First War also required the first propaganda. The first us versus them. The first story told around a fire about why the people on the other side of the river were different, were dangerous, were a threat that had to be dealt with before they dealt with you. The story came before the violence. It always does. Anthropologist Margaret Mead argued that war is not a biological inevitability. It is an invention. Like writing, like agriculture, like any other technology humans developed to solve a specific problem. The problem war solved was resource competition at a scale that individual violence couldn't handle. One person taking food from another person is a fight. One group systematically removing another group from their territory is a war. The difference is not the violence. The difference is the organization. And organization requires culture, requires language, requires the ability to imagine a future in which the other group no longer exists. War is not what happens when humans get angry. War is what happens when humans get organized. But here is the strange part. War also made humans better at almost everything else. The groups that were good at war developed better weapons, better communication, better leadership, better ways of feeding large numbers of people quickly. The pressure of organized conflict accelerated human innovation in almost every field that matters. The first metallurgy was for weapons. The first large-scale agriculture was to feed armies. The first written records were military logistics. War is the worst thing humans ever invented. It is also responsible for a significant portion of everything that makes modern life possible. Which is not an argument for war. It is just an uncomfortable fact about how human progress actually worked. And that is the part that should keep you up at night. Because the conditions that produced the First War have never gone away. They got bigger. The territory got larger. The weapons got more efficient. The stories got more sophisticated. But the calculation underneath it all is exactly the same as it was 13,000 years ago in a valley by the Nile. There is not enough. Someone has it, we need it. And there is no empty land left to walk into. Every war in human history is a variation of that sentence. The weapons change, the flags change, the reasons given change. The sentence never